Welcome back to It's Not Normal, the podcast, episode 46. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about retroactive jealousy. And I want to start off this week's episode by posing a question to you. Have you ever felt intense jealousy or insecurity about your friend or partner's past? And does imagining a time in their life before you sort of give you this sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach? Retroactive jealousy is something that I learned about relatively recently, and it's something that I have personally dealt with. And so I wanted to bring it to you because I figured maybe some of you are experiencing this or have experienced this in the past. And I know for me that understanding more about what I'm dealing with helps me to move through it and to take away its power. Retroactive jealousy is often referred to as a symptom of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and it describes this unhealthy preoccupation with another person's past. And more often than not, there is a focus put on a partner's past relationships, both romantic and platonic. But this can also apply to friendships and other aspects of a friend or a partner's life before you met. I want to preface this by saying that I have not been officially diagnosed with OCD. I don't currently have the resources to be assessed or diagnosed with OCD, but let's just say with the reading and the research that I've done, I wouldn't be surprised. You don't have to be diagnosed with OCD to experience retroactive jealousy, but the fear-based nature of OCD, the obsessive fixations, the repetitive behaviors, and the unwanted intrusive thoughts all sort of lend themselves to this way of thinking. And what's really interesting is that the development of OCD is thought to be a result of both genetics and environmental factors. And things like childhood trauma can sort of set the stage for the development of OCD or can increase the severity of OCD symptoms. Now, before we get too much into retroactive jealousy, I just want to break down OCD a little bit. We've got obsessions and we've got compulsions. Obsessions can take on the form of thoughts, images, or urges that cause anxiety. And in the research that I was doing about OCD, one of them that I came across that I have personally experienced is this obsessive fear of being responsible for something bad happening. It immediately resonated with me and brought me back to a number of different experiences throughout my childhood. There was a time in my life where I lived in the same house as my grandma. And anytime I would use her bathroom, if I would ever accidentally leave the light on, I would find myself halfway up the stairs, stuck in this loop of thought. What if my grandma sees the light on and she doesn't want it on? So she gets up to go and turn the light that I left on off. And what if there's something on the floor and she slips and she falls and now she breaks her hip and it's all my fault? Is an extra 30 seconds for me to run back downstairs and turn the light off really worth a broken hip? I don't think so. And so more often than not, I would give in to these obsessions and I would find myself turning around, going back downstairs and turning the light off. It always felt very preventative for me. Like I was always on the lookout. I never wanted to be responsible for something bad happening or for hurting someone. And so I would always go out of my way to do something to make sure that that didn't happen. And if I ever didn't do it, I was aware that I didn't do it. And I would get stuck in that loop of thought until I eventually did it. And then we've got the compulsions. Compulsions are repetitive thoughts or behaviors that temporarily neutralize the obsessions. And we indulge in these compulsions in an attempt to prevent any sort of negative repercussions, to relieve distress, or to make ourselves feel safe. In the research that I was doing about OCD, this was sort of the first thing that prompted me to draw a connection between OCD or OCD-like symptoms and childhood trauma, this desire for safety. Intrusive thoughts are one of the things that people with OCD seem to deal with. And immediately, there was a direct connection there for me. Because I have come to realize throughout my own healing journey and understanding more about my trauma just how much intrusive thoughts are a form of self-protection. We want to feel that safety. And one of the ways that we do that is through our thoughts, is by thinking of every possible scenario that could happen and preparing ourselves for it before it actually happens. And so retroactive jealousy specifically can add a lot of unwanted stress and tension to friendships and relationships. And it draws all of its strength. It is rooted in the past, and it really negatively affects your ability to be present in your current relationship, which can feel overwhelming for the person that's experiencing it and so frustrating for their friend or their partner. And if you've ever dealt with retroactive jealousy, you might have found yourself obsessing over your friend or your partner's past relationships. These thoughts might entirely consume you, where it's all that you can think about. I know for me, being raised in such a controlling environment, I was very sheltered throughout my childhood. I was not allowed the age-appropriate freedoms that now as an adult I understand to be normal. And being raised in that kind of environment and then learning firsthand from a friend or a partner about their past can be that much harder, because you start to realize that there are other people, peers of yours, that were allowed those age-appropriate freedoms. They were allowed to get to know themselves and to make mistakes. Maybe they did some of these stereotypical teenage things that you watched in movies or TV shows. And learning about that firsthand from someone in your life can be so overwhelming. You can start to develop these intense feelings of jealousy and resentment and insecurity. I know for me, learning about my partner's past was that much harder because of how controlled and sheltered I was throughout my childhood. It felt sort of like I was living my life in autopilot, like I had my eyes closed for the first 20 years of my life, and I had just opened them for the first time as a 22-year-old adult. And while that's happening, I'm coming to terms with the fact that my teenage years have come and gone. That time in my life is over, and I will never get to experience that again. It can be panic-inducing in a way, because you're starting to realize that there are other people out there who have experienced these things, and that a lot of these things that you were conditioned to believe were abnormal or taboo or not allowed were in fact normal. And the people who experienced them are just fine. These were freedoms that you could have and should have been allowed, but you were not because of your emotionally immature parent. And the flood of emotions that brings to the surface is really difficult to describe. And it's not something that you're going to move through in one sitting. This is something that might resurface so many times throughout your healing journey. And it's something that can be really easily triggered. And so I cannot stress how important it is for you to learn how to recognize and name these emotions that you're feeling. And once you can do that, you can start to trace back where they come from. But I was obsessed with friends and my partner's past, their past friendships, their past relationships, past experiences of theirs that they had before they met me. And history terrified me. Even the thought of someone who knew my partner before me gave me anxiety, because I felt like if they knew my partner before me, then they know more about him. They have certain shared experiences with him that I'll never be able to understand or recreate, that I may never even know about. And if they've known him for longer, then of course they have a deeper connection than we could ever have. And so I was terrified at the idea of my partner's past. And I think a lot of that fear stemmed from comparison. I think it's also really common when you're raised by an emotionally immature parent to feel like everything carries so much weight. And emotionally immature parents can be so rigid in their thought process that it can be so easy for you to apply that same way of thinking to all of your other relationships and to project that onto other people. And so not only was I obsessing over my partner's past and my friend's past, these relationships and experiences that I would never be a part of, but I was also assigning this imagined meaning to everything and connecting it to something or someone other than myself, which made me feel that much worse. You might find yourself, if you've experienced retroactive jealousy, digging for information and filling in the blanks with the worst case scenario. You might repeatedly ask a friend or a partner about their past. You might do a deep dive through their social media to try to find what can feel like evidence of their life before you were in it. You might want to know everything that you could possibly know, whatever information is available that's out there, you might want to absorb firsthand because you don't want to be hurt. What if there is something out there that you might find out that might hurt your feelings? You don't want to wait around for that to happen, and so you're going to take matters into your own hands and you're going to seek that out. And this is really where it sort of goes hand in hand with a lot of these different methods of self-protection that we develop as a result of being raised by an emotionally immature parent. We don't want to be caught off guard, and we've grown accustomed to being caught off guard. We understand the uncertainty and the unpredictability that can sometimes go hand in hand with our closest relationships. And so it almost feels like our responsibility to do everything that we can to make sure that we're prepared. But all that we're doing is hurting ourselves in the process. And I didn't know at the start of my relationship how to directly communicate. I didn't know that that was allowed to be a part of a relationship. And so rather than asking my partner questions directly and being able to recognize my own emotions and where they were coming from and share those with my partner, I resorted to unhealthy behaviors like this. But it can be so difficult to not do that when you don't know that direct communication is an option, when you don't know that honesty is normal in a healthy relationship. So many of us have experienced triangulation throughout childhood. Maybe we witnessed our parents intentionally deceiving one another, being dishonest, secretive, withholding information, talking badly about one another behind the other person's back. And so moving into a friendship or a relationship, no matter how healthy the other person might be, it can feel almost impossible not to project these unhealthy behaviors onto an otherwise healthy person. And before we've started to realize our trauma, this is something that we might be doing subconsciously. We may have no idea that we're actually doing these things because they have become so integrated into our lives for such an extended period of time that they've become our normal. And it's hard to imagine that anything outside of that actually exists. And so you might find yourself obsessing over your partner's past and gathering information from social media. All the while, you are filling in the missing details with these imagined worst-case scenarios. And this kind of goes back to earlier when we were talking about comparison. I know for me, I was always trying to imagine what would hurt me the most, and then thinking about it enough to the point where I would be prepared if I ever had to face something like that. And I found myself living in this constant state of comparison, and I thought my partner was too. I was comparing myself to past friends, our experiences to past experiences. And I thought that any time we would talk about something or do something that my partner had done in the past, he would think about the people that he experienced it with before. And then he would feel disappointed that he was there with me instead of these other people, because I had convinced myself that he believed that his life before me was in some way better, more fulfilling than it was now. And the truth is, that intrusive thought was rooted in insecurity and in fear. But when you're raised by an emotionally immature parent, you are compared to others, and you are existing in constant competition with an unrealistic version of yourself that never makes mistakes, that always neglects themselves, that suppresses all of their emotions. And so again, it's one of those instances where you grow up with this unhealthy comparison, this unhealthy sense of competition, and they sort of seamlessly integrate themselves into other relationships in your life, where you feel like you always have to be performing, you always have to be doing your best so that you can outdo this friend, so that you can outdo this partner. And what it all comes down to is a fear of abandonment and a fear of rejection. You want love and care from this person. And you have been conditioned to believe that the way to get that is to perform, is to be the best version of yourself for them. Because when you're raised by an emotionally immature parent, the idea of unconditional love doesn't necessarily make sense. We feel like we earn the love that we receive. And this kind of comparison can make it so difficult for you to allow yourself to receive affection from your partner or to develop a genuine emotional connection with a friend. Anytime they go out of their way to do something kind for you, you might immediately start to imagine a time that they've done that for or with someone else in the past. Maybe they take you out to a restaurant that you know from your investigative work on their social media that they've been to with another friend or partner. And now you find yourself sitting there unable to think about anything other than their past. You might convince yourself that that's what they're doing too, that they're comparing you and this experience to another person and the time that they've been here before. And these thoughts can be so consuming that they really negatively impact your ability to be present in the moment and to be open to receiving that kindness and affection from a person that you want kindness and affection from. And so all of this begs the question, where does it come from? It is so important if you feel like you have experienced retroactive jealousy, if this obsessive sort of fixation on a friend or a partner's past relationship, this deep-seated insecurity or resentment that you might feel anytime a past partner or experience is brought up, it is so important to start to understand where these different things come from. And for me, again, the connection between retroactive jealousy and OCD-like symptoms and childhood trauma was undeniable, because when you're raised by an emotionally immature parent, it exposes you to things like deception, intentionally deceptive behavior, secrecy and dishonesty, physical and or emotional loneliness, consistent uncertainty and unpredictability, and constant comparison and judgment. So many of us, I think, who were raised by emotionally immature parents understand what it's like to feel like we're not good enough. Like no matter what we do, we will never be enough. And so we're susceptible to things like low self-esteem and a lack of confidence, feeling like we are undeserving, like we have to earn our love. Emotionally immature parents are constantly moving the goalposts, forcing us to bind our self-worth directly to how much we do for them. And we've experienced manipulation at the hands of the people closest to us, the people who have told us just how much they care about us. And we understand how painful experiencing that kind of betrayal is. And so, of course, we would do anything to not experience that again. And so we become highly self-protective, and we develop behaviors like intrusive thoughts, anxious attachment, a fear of rejection and abandonment, self-neglect and self-doubt. All of these things can feed into this vicious cycle of obsessions and compulsions, of intrusive thoughts, fear-based intrusive thoughts, and things that we think that we can do to try to relieve them or to fight against them. That sort of cycle is something that I think a lot of children who were raised by emotionally immature parents have grown used to. And so what can we do about this? Because there are strategies, there are ways to help calm and move through this retroactive jealousy. Obviously, there's therapy. We can seek the help of a mental health professional. There's also ERP, exposure and response prevention, which is basically when you purposely expose yourself to different triggers and allow yourself to sit with the anxiety that they bring to the surface in a safe environment so that you can take away their power. But my answer, I think a great starting point, is self-love, which in my opinion starts with self-discovery. Being raised by emotionally immature parents doesn't necessarily allow much room for independence or personal growth and development. And so it can be so easy to become so distant from yourself and your personality. You become overrun with these different methods of self-protection. You're defensive and hypervigilant and can lose yourself in the process. And how can you possibly learn to love yourself if you don't yet know who that is? And so it's important for us to start to take steps to get to know who we are, to allow ourselves the space needed for self-discovery. And from there, you can allow yourself to start to fall in love with the person that you're becoming. And showing ourselves love, I think, makes it that much easier to understand when other people want to show us love. Because we start to recognize, hey, I'm pretty cool. I like the person that I am. I treat people nicely, and I've got really great interests, and I'm really passionate about this thing. We start to recognize all of our positive qualities and attributes and understand how those things might be appreciated by other people. It doesn't feel as unrealistic or as conditional as maybe it once did in the past. And so it leaves us much more open to receiving love and care and affection from other people in our lives. And I think once we start to develop that self-love, that is when we can start to let go of a lot of that insecurity. Because we start to understand that we are not always existing in a state of comparison or competition. That people may choose us because they truly enjoy being around us. Not just because we serve them and make their lives better, not just because we do the things that they want or expect us to do, but because they like our personality. They like being around us. Maybe we inspire them or motivate them in a really positive way. And so they're choosing to be around us. I think self-discovery and self-love allow you to start to see not only your individuality, but also your value. All of the really wonderful things that you can bring to the table in a friendship or a relationship. And it's okay to start small, to take baby steps in the process of getting to know yourself. Because being raised by an emotionally immature parent can mean being one half of an enmeshed relationship, can mean feeling little to no sense of individuality or autonomy. It can mean feeling like your sole purpose in life is to make other people's lives better. And so you completely neglect yourself and suppress all of your emotions until they almost feel invisible. And you've become so out of touch with them that you have to be reminded that you are allowed to feel your emotions. And from there, you have to start to understand what different emotions feel like and what to call them. And so it is a process and it is a long road. But I think the more you allow yourself to get to know who you are and to show yourself love and kindness and compassion, the more open you can be to receiving that from other people. And when you find yourself in a position where you are receiving that from other people in a real, genuine way, I think that can calm some of those obsessions. You may not feel the need to obsess over the past any longer because maybe, finally, you're allowing yourself to exist in the present. And that can be a really wonderful thing. I think understanding our past helps us to navigate our present and make a plan for our future. But I cannot stress how important it is to not live there. The past is not a place to live in. It is something that we can use to inform our decisions moving forward. It's something that teaches us lessons and reminds us of both the positive and the negative. With that, I think I'm going to be wrapping up this week's episode of It's Not Normal. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. If you're listening on Spotify, please be sure to leave us a rating. I will be back next week with another episode of It's Not Normal, the podcast. Bye.